Do your games look like this?
Van a aprender a respetarme, hijos de perra.
Te apuesto que tu tío se basa en tu culo a la misma vez en tu madre y en la misma cama. Y has visto toda esa...
Or this?
30 seconds to battle.
Or what about
Got
this?
some guys feeding.
Soy de Lima, chibolo conche madre, hijo de perra.
Well, they don't have to, and before we even start talking about some ways to fix that, I want to tell you the idea behind this video. The idea was to prove that climbing MMR whilst having low behavior score, and low behavior score here will be treated as less than 7,000, is harder than doing it with a healthy account. Now, the problem with running this experiment is that it touches in a lot of polemic things in the Dota scene, from smurfing to ruining games for other people. Scientifically speaking, I would love to play 100 games in each account and see what happens. Unfortunately, I don't want to be associated with this type of behavior. Instead, we only played 4 games in both accounts. Every replay ID will be available in case you guys want to see it for yourselves as well. Both accounts have around 3.7 MMR, but their behavior scores are greatly different. One has 3000, and this was the image that would show up when you logged in the account. The other account has 9000 plus. The first big difference we noticed was that queue times were super long for the low behavior score account. No one really knows how Valve's matchmaking works, but word runs around that there's a separate queue pool for the low behavior score players, and what we wanted to do is figure out whether it was harder to get MMR playing this supposedly different pool of players. The consensus around forums, YouTube, and Reddit is that if you're good, you can climb, and that's about it. And I do believe that this is true. With that in mind, what I did was find a player that was so good that skill was not going to be a problem, especially because of the low amount of games we would be playing. So even if he was against Smurfs, he could still win, and I wanted to get his feel about playing in both accounts. From the footage right now, you could see how long the queues were. On average, it took 9 minutes to find games against the 4 minutes in the other account. From a purely logical sense, if you play 10 games a day, you would have to wait 90 minutes against 40 on the other account, meaning that you could climb MMR faster, you could even play an extra game in the high behavior score account. But that's the most basic and simple difference the two polls, and most people already know about that. What I want you to focus on is toxicity and how that affects certain players. Obviously, toxicity affects everyone. Some can deal with it, some can't, and while you can mute annoying players, there's one very interesting thing we found about muting players in toxic behavior score that we will mention later down the line. The difference in every type of toxic behavior was outstanding. For instance, in this Lifestealer game, the allied Ricky suddenly decided it was time to farm the Lifestealer's lane for absolutely no reason. He was owning top at this stage, and even though he never interacted with that player for good or worse, he started stealing creeps. This is minor, but in a game you're playing in your own MMR, losing creeps like this could be game losing.
Alright, I got this one. Now my Rick is farming my lane just now. But for what? I don't know. Can you stop feeding creeps to it, please?
People that are affected by this more than others will tilt. Later on, look at the score here of that Lifestealer, by the way. He starts being super flamed. And obviously this guy is a 6k player, he knows those guys don't know shit. But when you're lower MMR, you start doubting yourself, the toxicity really starts affecting you, and you know, that could really ruin a player's game where he was actually doing pretty well. Whereas in higher behavior score, that never happened to the high MMR player. Obviously it happens, but apparently way less frequently. The same Ricky would spam invoker items that lost mid versus brood, completely destroying team morale. Obviously, I'm not saying that this is exclusive to low behavior score, but the frequency and the level of it was blatantly apparent, even though we only played 4 games. The usual counter-argument to toxicity is that if you're not toxic, then there's a bigger chance that the enemy team will have more combined toxicity than your team, and that's kinda true. For instance, in one of the games, the enemy Dark Willow started feeding for absolutely no reason.
Alright, dude. Oh my gosh, man.
She was AFK for 3 minutes and then started feeding. What I mentioned about muting toxic people earlier shows itself in this game. Most players stuck in this toxic pool understand how toxic the games become, and what ensues is zero communication because most of them actually mute everyone. The 6K player was insanely strong and big. The players in his team knew that, but they wouldn't respond to what he said, not because they're low MMR players and want to jungle, but because everyone muted him without even trying to talk. You can see that Ricky tries to communicate here, but no one responds to him as well.
Mi gema P concha de tu madre. ¿Dónde está ese invoker baboso? ¿Por qué? Ah, la mierda, mira ese invoker.
It just feels like everyone mutes each other, but they're still talking in their microphones. The owner of this toxic account is a 5.5k MMR player, and he uses this one to party queue with his lower MMR friends. He said that getting solo MMR in this toxic account for him is almost as hard as getting MMR in the 5.5k account, and the 6k player agrees. He said that only one of the 4 games was easy, and he even managed to lose one of the 4 he played, which shouldn't really happen when you're almost double the MMR of an account. What he said is there's just too much randomness in every game. Look at this Lina game in the toxic account. Once again, the enemy team is feeding, which should give Dire the advantage, and thus the non-toxic player has an edge.
I'm going. 30 seconds to battle.
Alright, looks like a fucking classic essay though, the man.
But the Dire's Lauder was very pissed at Lina going middle. He decides to steal Mirana's last hits. The fight continues to a point where anyone would be annoyed, maybe even tilted about it. The Slaughter then jungles for a huge portion of the game. Not because this is a 3k MMR game, but because he was pissed at everyone. The Wind Ranger that fed early on is now tryharding, and this is the randomness factor I mentioned. For instance, if you see someone killing themselves twice, you might just accept the fact that you lost and then start slacking off a little bit. But then the Wind Ranger is now tryharding, so if you were on Radiant, maybe there was a chance that they would win, but you know, everyone was like, okay, this game is over, this guy's just gonna feed until the game ends, but that didn't happen. You see, that's what I'm trying to say. There's so much randomness that it's hard to actually focus in the game. You never know what to expect, you don't feel like you can rely on anyone, there's no communication, and the games feel like they can be decided 90% of the time by a coin flip, if everyone is equally skilled. In this Ember game, the only one that the 6k player managed to lose, they were 30k gold ahead for a long time, but with troubles pushing. The more they struggled, toxicity really brewed to this moment where Pango just snaps.
Useless anti-mage. Fucking useless anti-mage. No Lim can fucking use anti-mage. Report his ass.
The Ember almost kept them in the game, and they lost. And what the player told me was that playing that account was one of the worst Dota experiences of his life. We actually settled on 6 games for each account, but he refused to play more than 4. What about the high behavior score account, Bowie? You didn't mention much about games. Well, there was not much to mention, they were all stomps. The average duration of the games was around 25 minutes, and what the player explained to me is that he felt his impact was able to show way more in those games because with less randomness, aka his players feeding, complaining, jungling, using the courier, the game was just straightforward every time. He would win his lanes, his teammates also did not have him muted, so it was easier for him to tell them what to do and then just finish the games very fast. And that is also something about getting more MMR. Obviously, you're not going to stomp every game if you're playing in your correct MMR, but just because the games could end faster, you know, because there's no random buybacks or people feeding, it already increases the speed that you would get MMR. But the games definitely feel more enjoyable. Now, what do you do if you want to get behavior score in the first place to get better games? There are 2 options. If you have bad behavior score because maybe you were new to the game and you just got flamed and reported because you were playing solo queue without being ready. So you don't have bad behavior score because you're toxic, people just didn't knew that you were new. I myself found that playing party queue and being cool about it can get you a lot of behavior score. Normally people say that playing Turbo is the fast and better alternative, which is somewhat true, but the 2 and 3 man parties that I played allowed me to interact with the other players in my team and get commands, and this will speed up the process a little bit. Obviously, if you're not the type that gets commands easily, then Turbo might be a great way for you to fix your account. I really recommend for anyone trying to get MMR to first and foremost make sure that you're playing on an account that has more than 8,000 behavior score. The long queues paired with randomness can make Dota look like the scariest and dumbest game ever, and I don't think that's what it's supposed to be. Dota can be amazing, and from someone that came from a 6k plus account to a 9k one, you cannot believe how different the games feel. So even if the whole thesis of this video is wrong and it's actually easier to get MMR in toxic behavior score, I would still recommend fixing your behavior score. It just feels amazing to play in accounts like that and just chill with more respectful people. Alright guys, thank you very much for liking, commenting, and subscribing. You can check my Patreon, where there's some cool rewards, and that allows this channel to be a little more sustainable. As you guys know, I've been casting for a while. I'm casting the entirety of Green League, and you can actually see some games on Noob From UA. So if it's been a while since you watched me cast, maybe you should check some of the replays there. I think I've gotten much better. And if you do enjoy what you see there, maybe consider following me on Twitch, because I'm going to be casting and maybe you like what you see.